Captain Jack Mercer stared out the viewport of the diplomatic vessel, reasonable doubt, and suppressed a snort. The name of the ship had been his idea. The brass had wanted something more dignified, like Ambassador or Olive Branch, but Mercer had pushed back, hard. If we're going to play this ridiculous charade, he had told Admiral Knox, then at least let me have my little joke. The joke, of course, was that no one, absolutely no one, in the entire United Earth government believed for 1 second that the Vraxians actually wanted peace. Not after they'd spent the last decade trying to exterminate humanity from the galaxy like an inconvenient case of space lice. Captain, called Lieutenant Rodriguez from her console, we're receiving the final treaty draft from Vraxian Command. Mercer swiveled his chair and raised an eyebrow. And? How insulting is it this time? Rodriguez scrolled through the document, her expression shifting from concentration to amusement. Sir, they're offering to withdraw from 3 contested systems, provide technological exchanges for our agricultural colonies, and establish free trade corridors. She looked up. It's almost generous. Exactly, Mercer said, rising from his chair and straightening his dress uniform. Which means they're planning something spectacularly nasty. He adjusted his collar, which seemed determined to choke him. No one designs a uniform this uncomfortable, unless they actively hate the person wearing it. The bridge crew chuckled. It was gallows humor, but humor nonetheless. Humanity had been outgunned and outmaneuvered by the technologically superior Vraxians since first contact. The only thing that had kept Earth and her colonies from falling was humanity's infuriating ability to be unpredictable, resourceful, and just plain stubborn. Captain, the ship's AI announced in its deliberately casual voice, Admiral Knox is requesting a secure channel. Put her through to my ready room, Mercer replied, already moving toward the small office adjacent to the bridge. And Jenkins, make sure our Vraxian friends think we're absolutely thrilled about this treaty. Lay it on thick. Communications Officer Jenkins grinned. Already composing a response dripping with gratitude and relief, sir. The door to the ready room slid shut behind Mercer as he settled into his chair. The wall screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Helena Knox, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression that of someone who had just bitten into a lemon while simultaneously stubbing her toe. Mercer, she said, without preamble, I trust you've received the latest insult disguised as diplomacy. Just came through, Admiral. They're being suspiciously generous. Knox snorted. I don't trust those 6-limbed squid faces, as far as I could throw their mothership. Intelligence confirms what we suspected. This summit is a trap. Mercer nodded. He'd known it all along. Everyone had. The question is, what kind of trap? Assassination? Hostage situation? Full-scale ambush? All of the above, most likely. Knox replied, her voice dry. Which is precisely why we're sending you. Your particular brand of, what shall we call it? Tactical skepticism. I believe my last performance review called it pathological inability to take anything at face value, Mercer said with a slight smile. A valuable trait when dealing with pathological liars, Knox countered. The reasonable doubt will dock at Neutral Station Epsilon in 18 hours. Your official mission is to finalize the peace treaty and usher in a new era of cooperation between our species. And my actual mission? Knox's severe expression cracked slightly, revealing a predatory smile. Spring their trap, Captain. But do it on our terms. Operation Looking Glass is already in position. Mercer felt a wave of satisfaction. Looking Glass, the contingency plan humanity had been developing for years. While the Vraxians thought they were dealing with desperate, outmatched humans eager for peace, the United Earth government had been preparing for exactly this scenario. One more thing, Knox added. We're sending Lieutenant Dax Ramirez to join your delegation. Officially, he's a protocol specialist. Unofficially, military intelligence. Mercer finished. Good. We'll need all the help we can get to make this look convincing. Remember, Captain, the treaty is a lie. The peace summit is a lie. The only truth in this entire situation is that the Vraxians have severely underestimated humanity's capacity for paranoia. Knox leaned closer to the screen. Make them regret that oversight. With pleasure, Admiral, Mercer replied, already mentally preparing for the performance of his life. After all, what's more human than smiling at your enemy, while planning 10 different ways to ruin their day? As the transmission ended, Mercer couldn't help but chuckle. If the Vraxians wanted to play diplomatic games, They were about to learn that humans had invented the concept of saying one thing while planning another. It was practically a planetary pastime. The intercom buzzed. "Captain," Rodriguez announced, "Lieutenant Ramirez has arrived and is requesting permission to come aboard." "Permission granted," Mercer replied, straightening his uniform again. "And inform the crew from this moment forward, we're all devoted advocates for interspecies peace and harmony." He paused, then added with a smile, "At least that's what the Vraxians need to believe. Let's go make some new friends, temporarily." Lieutenant Dax Ramirez was not what Mercer had expected. Instead of the typical stern-faced intelligence officer with a personality like cardboard, Ramirez was a short, round-faced man with an infectious laugh and what appeared to be a collection of novelty pins on the inside of his regulation jacket. "Permission to speak freely, Captain?" Ramirez asked after their initial briefing in Mercer's ready room. "Always," Mercer replied, curious. "This treaty," Ramirez pulled up the document on his tablet, "is the diplomatic equivalent of a flashing neon sign that reads, 'It's definitely not a trap, we promise.'" He scrolled through the terms with increasing animation. "Look at this. The Vraxians are offering us access to their quantum communication network. And here, mineral rights to the Centauri belt. And my personal favorite," he paused for dramatic effect, "a formal apology for the misunderstanding at New Brisbane, where they, vaporized an entire colony." Mercer leaned back in his chair. "Pretty generous for a species that was calling us bipedal genetic accidents just a few months ago." "Exactly," Ramirez's eyes gleamed. "Intelligence has been analyzing their communication patterns. The treaty was written to appeal specifically to human psychological triggers: guilt, reconciliation, fairness. It's practically a love letter designed by an algorithm that studied human negotiation tactics but missed the part about subtlety." The ship's AI chimed in. "Lieutenant Ramirez is correct. My analysis shows 94% probability that this document was crafted using their behavioral prediction matrix, which they believe we don't know about." "Good thing we hacked their prediction matrix 6 months ago," Mercer replied. "What does Admiral Knox think their actual plan is?" Ramirez's cheerful demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more focused. "Multiple scenarios, but the most likely is that they're planning to eliminate Earth's entire diplomatic corps in one stroke. The Peace Summit location they chose, Neutral Station Epsilon, has some interesting structural modifications that weren't in the original blueprints." "Let me guess," Rodriguez said from the doorway, where she had been quietly listening. "Hidden weapons, secret detention areas, self-destruct capabilities." "All of the above," Ramirez confirmed. "Plus we've detected unusual energy signatures consistent with their phase shift technology. They could have an entire battle fleet hiding in subspace around that station." Mercer drummed his fingers on his desk. "So they invite us to a peace summit, kill or capture our delegation, and then launch a surprise attack while our leadership is in disarray. Classic Vraxian strategy," Rodriguez commented. "They've always favored decapitation strikes. Which is why Operation Looking Glass is so beautiful," Ramirez said with evident admiration. "While they think they're luring us into their trap, we're actually leading them into ours," Mercer finished. "Admiral Knox has kept Looking Glass on a strict need-to-know basis. Care to enlighten us on the details, Lieutenant?" Ramirez glanced around, then tapped his tablet. The lights in the ready room dimmed as a holographic display appeared above the desk. It showed Neutral Station Epsilon surrounded by tiny blinking dots. "These are microsatellites we've been deploying for the past 3 months, he explained. "Completely passive, virtually undetectable. They've been mapping every subspace distortion around the station." The display zoomed out, revealing larger signatures. "And these, Captain, are the Vraxian ships hiding in wait. 17 warships, including their flagship, the Emperor's Claw," Rodriguez whistled. "That's a third of their fleet. And directly behind them," Ramirez continued as the display shifted again, "is where we've positioned our own surprise." New signatures appeared, represented by blue dots. "The 5th and 8th fleets, equipped with the new Phantom drives. They've been shadowing the Vraxian forces for weeks, completely undetected." Mercer felt a smile spreading across his face. "So when the Vraxians spring their trap, our fleets will spring ours," Ramirez confirmed. "But that's just the military component. The real genius is the diplomatic angle." The hologram changed to show documentation, pages of legal text, signatures, and official seals. "What am I looking at?" Mercer asked. "The actual peace treaty," Ramirez said proudly. "The one we've been secretly negotiating with the Vraxian separatist faction for the past year." There was a moment of stunned silence. "I'm sorry," Rodriguez finally said. "The Vraxian, what now?" "Separatist faction," Ramirez repeated. "Turns out, Not all Vraxians are keen on eternal war with humanity. There's a growing movement within their scientific and merchant castes, pushing for genuine cooperation. Admiral Knox has been in contact with their leaders through back channels. Mercer leaned forward, fascinated. Does the Emperor know about this? Not yet, Ramirez grinned. But he will when half his ambush fleet suddenly changes allegiance in the middle of their attack. The ready room fell silent as the implications sank in. It wasn't just a counter-ambush, it was a masterfully orchestrated political coup. So Mercer said slowly, our job is to play the naive grateful humans, walk willingly into their trap, act surprised when they betray us, and then witness the spectacular implosion of the Vraxian Empire. Pretty much, Ramirez confirmed cheerfully. Oh, and try not to get killed in the process. That part's important. Mercer chuckled. Humanity has spent centuries perfecting the art of looking weaker than we actually are. I think we can manage one more performance. He stood up, straightening his uniform. Rodriguez, inform the crew of our actual mission parameters on a need-to-know basis. Ramirez, I want you to brief our diplomatic team on exactly how surprised they should act when the Vraxians inevitably betray us. How surprised are we talking, sir? Ramirez asked, mildly shocked, utterly devastated. Oscar-worthy emotional breakdown. Let's go with righteous indignation mixed with profound disappointment, Mercer decided. We want to sell this, but let's not overdo it. As the officers filed out, Mercer turned back to the viewport. The stars streaked by as the reasonable doubt continued its journey toward what the Vraxians thought would be humanity's downfall. Instead, it would be the stage for the greatest act of diplomatic jujitsu in galactic history. Captain, the AI interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a hail from the Vraxian advanced diplomatic vessel. They're requesting a preliminary meeting before we reach the station. Mercer straightened his shoulders and put on his best impression of an earnest, slightly naive human captain who absolutely definitely believed in this peace treaty. Perfect timing, he murmured. Tell them we're honored by their request and looking forward to a new era of peaceful cooperation. The lie rolled off his tongue easily. After all, humanity had been pretending to trust the Vraxians for years. They just never suspected that humans had been playing the same game and were about to change all the rules. Neutral Station Epsilon loomed before them, a massive wheel-shaped structure rotating slowly against the backdrop of a luminous nebula. The station had been constructed by the Argosian Collective, a species that had evolved beyond physical form centuries ago and now existed primarily as data patterns. The Argosians had a reputation for absolute neutrality, which made their stations perfect for diplomatic summits between species that would otherwise prefer to annihilate each other. Beautiful, isn't it? Mercer remarked to Ambassador William Donovan, the head of the human diplomatic delegation. Almost makes you forget it's probably rigged to explode. Donovan, a tall, lean man with a perpetually arched eyebrow, adjusted his ceremonial sash. Rigged to explode, filled with neurotoxins, or designed to fold into a giant space origami prison. The possibilities are endless. That's why I like you, Bill, Mercer said, clapping the diplomat on the shoulder. Always looking on the bright side. Approaching docking bay, Rodriguez announced from the helm. Sensors detecting 27 ships in the vicinity. 8 Argosian, 14 commercial vessels of various origins, and 5 Vraxian diplomatic cruisers. Ramirez, who had been quietly working at a terminal, looked up. Only 5 Vraxian ships visible. Our scans show at least 17 more hiding in subspace pockets. They're really not subtle, are they? Subtlety isn't their strong suit, Mercer replied. These are the same folks who think surprise diplomatic summit means showing up with a planetary bombardment fleet as your +1. The reasonable doubt glided smoothly into its assigned berth. Through the viewport, Mercer could see other diplomatic vessels already docked. Representatives from a dozen neutral species had been invited to witness the historic peace treaty signing between humanity and the Vraxian Empire. Or as I like to call them, Donovan murmured, following Mercer's gaze, the audience for our little drama. Mercer nodded. Admiral Knox made sure to invite species that have had their own difficulties with the Vraxians in the past. If this goes south publicly, the Emperor loses face with potential allies. When this goes south, Donovan corrected. Let's not pretend there's any other outcome. The docking procedure completed with a soft thud and the hiss of pressure equalization. Minutes later, the diplomatic team was assembled in the airlock chamber. Besides Mercer, Donovan and Ramirez, there were 4 other diplomats, 2 cultural specialists, and a small security detail that looked professional but deliberately non-threatening. Remember, Mercer addressed the group, we're overjoyed about this peace treaty. We believe every word of it. We're practically giddy with relief that the big scary Vraxians have decided to be our friends. He paused. But not too giddy. That would be suspicious. Cautiously optimistic, Donovan suggested. Like a man who's won the lottery but hasn't checked all the numbers yet. Perfect, Mercer agreed. Let's go make some history, or at least a very convincing historical reenactment. The airlock doors slid open, revealing a reception area decorated with symbols from both human and Vraxian cultures, a gesture of unity that would have been touching if it weren't so obviously insincere. Standing at the center of the welcoming committee was Ambassador Krell, the Vraxian diplomat who had supposedly spearheaded the peace initiative. Krell was tall even for a Vraxian, with the characteristic 6 limbs and mottled blue-gray skin. 4 of his limbs ended in delicate, 4-fingered hands, while the lower 2 were more muscular and planted firmly on the ground. His face was a complex arrangement of sensory organs, dominated by 3 large eyes that blinked in an unsynchronized pattern that humans generally found unsettling. Captain Mercer, Ambassador Donovan, Krell's voice was a deep, resonant sound processed through a translation device at his throat. The glorious Vraxian Empire welcomes you with open arms and sincere hopes for lasting peace. The irony of open arms wasn't lost on Mercer, given that Vraxians had 4 of them and traditionally used the upper pair for combat and the middle pair for diplomacy. The lower limbs were never raised in formal settings. Ambassador Krell, Donovan stepped forward, executing a perfect Vraxian greeting gesture with his hands. The United Earth government is honored by your hospitality and shares your commitment to ending centuries of misunderstanding between our species. Misunderstanding. A diplomatic euphemism for you tried to exterminate us and we retaliated by blowing up 3 of your colony worlds. Krell's central eye widened slightly, surprise or perhaps appreciation for Donovan's knowledge of Vraxian etiquette. Please, follow me. The other delegations are gathering in the grand concourse for the welcoming ceremony. As they followed Krell through the station's gleaming corridors, Mercer took careful note of their surroundings. The station was impressive, all sweeping arches and dramatic lighting, but his trained eye spotted the subtle signs of recent modifications. Certain panels weren't quite flush with the walls, some security cameras were newer than others. Small details that most wouldn't notice, but which confirmed intelligence's reports about the station's renovations. Quite the turnout, Mercer commented as they entered the grand concourse, a massive open area at the heart of the station. Delegates from across the galaxy mingled in groups, their varied physiologies creating a living mosaic of galactic diversity. I didn't realize our little treaty signing warranted such attention. Little. Krell's translation device couldn't quite capture the tone, but Mercer suspected it was indignation. Captain Mercer, this is perhaps the most significant diplomatic event of the decade. The formalization of peace between our great civilizations will reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. Of course, Mercer replied smoothly. I simply meant that compared to the scale of the galaxy, our past conflicts seem insignificant. Krell's middle arms made a gesture that the translator interpreted as conciliatory. A philosophical perspective worthy of consideration. Perhaps our species are not so different after all. Ramirez, who had been scanning the room while pretending to admire the architecture, sidled up to Mercer. Sir, I'm detecting unusual energy readings from the eastern quadrant of the station, consistent with phase shift technology. Keep an eye on it, Mercer murmured. But don't look too interested. The diplomatic dance continued as they were introduced to various dignitaries. Mercer noted with interest the representatives from the Corvus Confederation and the Tau Collective, both powers that had historically been at odds with the Vraxians. Admiral Knox had chosen the guest list carefully. Captain Mercer, a new voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find himself face to face with Commander Grox, the military attaché to the Vraxian delegation. Unlike the willowy Krell, Grox was built like a tank, broad-shouldered and imposing with battle scars visible on his exposed skin. Commander, Mercer acknowledged with a respectful nod. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Indeed not, Grox replied, his translator rendering his voice as a gravelly rumble. Though I've studied your tactics extensively, your defense of the Procyon system was unorthodox, but effective. High praise coming from a Vraxian commander, Mercer said, wondering if this was a genuine compliment or an attempt to gauge his reaction. Not praise, Grox corrected. Observation. Your species has a remarkable capacity for surviving when by all rational analysis you should be defeated. We're stubborn that way, Mercer replied with a smile. Some might say irrationally persistent. Yes, Grox said, his 3 eyes focusing intently on Mercer. It is what makes you both fascinating and dangerous. I look forward to seeing how you adapt to peace. The way Grox pronounced the word peace made it sound like a disease. As do I, Mercer said, maintaining his diplomatic facade. Change is always challenging, but I believe both our species are capable of evolution. Grox made a sound that might have been laughter. Evolution, yes. The strong adapt. The weak, he left the sentence hanging. If you'll excuse me, Commander, Mercer said, spotting Ramirez signaling him discreetly from across the room. Diplomatic duties call. As he walked away, Mercer felt Grox's eyes on his back. The Vraxian commander wasn't even trying to hide his hostility, which meant either he was terrible at diplomacy, or he didn't expect the humans to be alive long enough for it to matter. What is it? Mercer asked as he reached Ramirez. The energy readings are intensifying, Ramirez reported quietly. And I've identified 3 Vraxian security officers carrying concealed weapons. They're not on the official security roster. Mercer nodded, unsurprised. They're accelerating their timeline. How long until they make their move? Based on the subspace communications I've intercepted, they're waiting for the formal treaty presentation, when all the delegations are gathered in one place. Classic, Mercer muttered. Nothing says we come in peace quite like planning a massacre during your own treaty ceremony. Ramirez's eyes darted around the room. Should we warn the neutral delegates? No, Mercer decided. We need the Vraxians to show their hand publicly. Admiral Knox was very clear, the political fallout is as important as the military victory. Speaking of which, Ramirez said, our shadow fleet is in position. The moment the Vraxians make their move, Operation Looking Glass goes active. Mercer allowed himself a small grim smile. Then I suppose we should take our places for the ceremony. After all, we wouldn't want to miss the Vraxians' big reveal. As the delegates began moving toward the ceremonial hall, Mercer caught Donovan's eye across the room and gave a slight nod. The ambassador's return nod was equally subtle, a silent confirmation that the human delegation was ready for whatever came next. Attention, honored delegates. Krell's amplified voice rose above the murmur of conversation. If you would please proceed to the Harmony Chamber, the treaty presentation will begin momentarily. Harmony Chamber, Mercer whispered to Ramirez. Could they possibly be more heavy-handed with the symbolism? Actually yes, Ramirez replied with a straight face. I heard they initially wanted to call it the Eternal Peace and definitely not a trap room. Despite the gravity of the situation, Mercer had to stifle a laugh. As they moved with the crowd toward what was almost certainly an elaborately staged ambush, he found himself feeling strangely calm. The Vraxians thought they were springing a trap on unsuspecting humans. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The Harmony Chamber was a marvel of architectural showmanship, a perfect sphere with delegates seated on transparent platforms that seemed to float in space. At the center hovered the holographic treaty document, rotating slowly for all to see. Subtle, Donovan muttered to Mercer. Like being trapped in a diplomatic snow globe. Krell took his position at the presentation podium. Esteemed delegates, today marks a historic moment as the Vraxian Empire and United Earth government put aside our differences to forge a lasting peace. While the Vraxian ambassador droned on about brotherhood and cooperation, Ramirez was furiously working his datapad, disguising his actions as taking diplomatic notes. Captain, he whispered. I've cracked their security network. The station's been rigged with containment fields. They're planning to trap us, then flood the chamber with paralytic gas. Mercer nodded slightly. Time frame, minutes. They've already activated the subspace jammers to cut off communication with our fleet. Little do they know, Mercer replied with a tight smile. At the podium, Krell had reached the climax of his speech. And so with great honor, I invite Ambassador Donovan to join me in signing this historic accord. Donovan rose, the picture of diplomatic dignity, and approached the central platform. Just as he reached for the ceremonial pen, Ramirez's datapad flashed red. Now, Ramirez hissed. Mercer stood abruptly. Ambassador Krell, before we proceed, I believe there's something you should know. The Vraxian's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of irritation. Captain, this is hardly the time for honesty. Mercer interrupted. I disagree, this is exactly the time. He addressed the assembled delegates. Honored representatives, the Vraxian Empire has invited us here under false pretenses. This station has been modified with containment fields and weapons systems. In approximately, he glanced at Ramirez, who held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes, they plan to activate these systems, trap us all and launch a surprise attack on human space. A murmur of shock rippled through the chamber. Krell's mottled skin darkened with anger. These are outrageous accusations. Captain Mercer clearly suffers from the human affliction of paranoia. Oh, spare us the indignation, Mercer said, nodding to Ramirez, who tapped his datapad. The chamber's main display screen flickered, then showed detailed schematics of the station's modifications, complete with Vraxian military authorization codes. We've known about your plan for months, Mercer continued casually. The hidden fleet in subspace. The paralytic gas. The prepared statement about how tragically the peace summit ended in violence, with no survivors to contradict your version of events. Commander Grox surged to his feet, hand moving to a concealed weapon. Enough of this charade. Security teams, execute Protocol Omega. Armed Vraxians appeared at every exit. The neutral delegates cried out in alarm as containment fields shimmered into existence, sealing off escape routes. Ambassador Krell, Donovan said calmly. Would you care to explain to our neutral witnesses why your security forces are drawing weapons at a peace summit? Krell's composure cracked. It doesn't matter. Your fleet is cut off by our jammers. Our battleships will emerge from subspace momentarily. This station and everyone on it is under Vraxian control. About those jammers, Mercer said, checking his watch. Lieutenant Ramirez, would you do the honors? Ramirez grinned and pressed a button on his datapad. Immediately, the station's lights flickered. What have you done? Grox demanded. We replaced your jammers with our own versions 3 weeks ago, Ramirez explained cheerfully. Yours are currently non-operational. Ours, however, are working perfectly, just not in the way you might expect. The main display changed again, now showing the space around the station. One by one, massive Vraxian warships phased into normal space from their subspace hiding places, exactly as planned. Except for one detail. As the ships appeared, their identification beacons changed from Vraxian military codes to human fleet signatures. On their hulls, Vraxian imperial symbols dissolved, replaced by the insignia of the United Earth Fleet. Allow me to introduce Operation Looking Glass, Mercer announced. We took the liberty of reprogramming your fleet's command protocols while they were sitting in subspace. They now respond to our authentication codes. Grox roared in fury, drawing his weapon fully, only to have it yanked from his grasp by an unseen force. I should mention, Ramirez added, we also deployed counterinsurgency drones throughout the station. Any weapon fired will be redirected. Ambassador Krell slumped against the podium. Impossible, how could you possibly? We had help, Donovan interrupted, gesturing toward a Vraxian delegate, who had been silent until now. The delegate stood, removing a holographic disguise to reveal distinctive markings of the Vraxian scientific caste. Ambassador Krell, Commander Grox, the revealed Vraxian said, I am Director Vex of the Separatist Coalition. Not all Vraxians desire eternal war. Some of us believe cooperation with humans is the only path to survival. The display changed again, showing human fleets materializing behind the subverted Vraxian ships. Your Emperor's warmongering has led us to the brink of extinction, Vex continued. This coup was necessary. Treason, Grox snarled. Evolution, Vex corrected. As you said yourself, Commander, the strong adapt. Mercer stepped forward. Now, Ambassador Krell, shall we discuss the real peace treaty? The one your Emperor doesn't know about yet. As the Vraxian delegation realized the full extent of their defeat, the neutral delegates were watching with astonishment. The humans hadn't just anticipated the trap, they had turned it into the most elaborate counter-ambush in galactic history. Oh, and one more thing, Mercer added, with a smile that was almost kind. We actually do want peace, just not on your terms. He turned to Ramirez. Lieutenant, would you please restart the environmentals? I believe the air in here has become rather stale with all these failed plots hanging about. Captain Mercer couldn't help but savor the moment as the Vraxian delegation's composure completely disintegrated. Commander Grox was practically vibrating with rage, his skin flushing to a deep indigo, a warning sign that he was approaching the Vraxian equivalent of a stroke. Ambassador Krell, meanwhile, had gone an ashy pale color as he frantically tapped at his communication device, presumably trying to contact the Emperor with news of their catastrophic failure. Your devices won't work, Ramirez informed them cheerfully. We're jamming all outgoing communications until we've secured the station. Outside the Harmony Chamber's massive viewport, the situation in space was evolving rapidly. The Vraxian ships, now under human control, were repositioning into a defensive formation around the station. Behind them, the human fleet had fully materialized, an impressive array of warships that had been hiding in wait, just as the Vraxians had been. Admiral Knox sends her regards, Mercer said, gesturing to the newly arrived flagship at the center of the human formation. She wanted to be here personally to oversee this operation. This is an act of war, Krell managed to sputter. Donovan raised an eyebrow. Ambassador, may I remind you that you were moments away from executing every diplomat in this chamber and launching a surprise attack on human space. I believe the term act of wars more accurately applies to your actions. The neutral delegates, who had been watching the confrontation in stunned silence, began murmuring among themselves. Several were openly recording the proceedings, exactly as Admiral Knox had hoped. There would be no containing this diplomatic disaster for the Vraxian Empire. Lieutenant, Mercer said to Ramirez, please activate the petty officer. Ramirez grinned and tapped a sequence into his datapad. With pleasure, sir. A holographic figure shimmered into existence at the center of the chamber, a small, unassuming human wearing what appeared to be an ancient naval uniform, complete with a comically large hat. Good afternoon, everyone. The hologram announced in a cheerful voice. I am the petty officer, Earth's specialized military AI. I've been designed with one primary function: to be as petty and vindictive as technologically possible. The AI turned its attention to the Vraxian ships visible through the viewport. I've taken the liberty of accessing your fleet's operational systems. Did you know your security protocols haven't been updated in over 3 standard cycles? 6. Anyway, I've made some improvements to your ship's entertainment systems. On cue, the external running lights of all 17 Vraxian warships began flashing in synchronized patterns, forming what appeared to be, is that, dancing? One of the neutral delegates asked incredulously. The human cultural phenomenon known as disco, to be precise, the petty officer confirmed. I've also replaced all internal communication sounds with what humans call a kazoo, very dignified instrument. And finally, my personal touch. I've reprogrammed your nutrient dispensers to produce only items from the human children's menu. I recommend the dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. They're quite delightful. Commander Grox looked like he might explode. You dare to humiliate the mighty Vraxian fleet. When the Emperor learns of this, oh, he already knows. The petty officer interrupted. I took the liberty of broadcasting this entire encounter on all Vraxian communication channels. The feed is being picked up across 17 systems. Current viewership is, oh my, over 3 billion Vraxians and counting. You can't do that, Krell gasped. Imperial communications are encrypted. We're encrypted, Ramirez corrected. Turns out your encryption keys were changed 6 months ago. By us. The chamber fell silent as the full implications sank in. This wasn't just a military counter-ambush. It was a comprehensive dismantling of Vraxian credibility on every level. Outside, the situation escalated further as new ships began appearing, not human or Vraxian, but belonging to the neutral species present at the summit. They had been waiting just out of range, prepared to intervene if necessary. Captain, Rodriguez's voice came through Mercer's communicator. The Corvus Confederation and Tau Collective are hailing us. They're offering military support if needed. Tell them the situation is under control, Mercer replied, but we appreciate their presence as witnesses. He turned his attention back to the Vraxian delegation. Now about that peace treaty. The real one. Director Vex stepped forward. For too long the Emperor has led our people on a path of destruction. Our resources are depleted. Our population's dwindling, all to fuel his obsession with conquering humanity. The separatist coalition represents over 30% of Vraxian citizens, scientists, educators, merchants, colonists. We want an end to this pointless conflict. Traitors, Grox spat. The Emperor will have you all executed. The Emperor, Vex replied calmly, is currently facing a vote of no confidence from the Great Cast Council. The broadcast of this debacle was the final evidence needed to show his incompetence. On cue, the petty officer projected a new image, a live feed from the Vraxian homeworld, showing the Imperial Palace surrounded by protesters. The Emperor's elite guard appeared to be standing down rather than confronting the crowds. I believe, Ambassador Donovan said smoothly, this presents us with a unique opportunity. The treaty we've negotiated with the separatist coalition offers terms that benefit both our species. Genuine peace, not the fiction you were presenting. Krell, seeing which way the wind was blowing, attempted to recover some dignity. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. As the Emperor's representative, I would be willing to review these alternative terms. How magnanimous of you, Mercer said dryly, especially considering you have absolutely no choice in the matter. The space battle that should have happened, that the Vraxians had planned so meticulously, never materialized. Instead, humanity had executed the most comprehensive diplomatic coup in galactic history, without firing a single shot. As if to emphasize this point, Admiral Knox chose that moment to establish a direct communication link to the chamber. Captain Mercer, her stern face appeared on the main display. I see Operation Looking Glass has proceeded according to plan. Yes, Admiral, Mercer confirmed. The Vraxian delegation has been informed of the adjustments to their strategy. Excellent, Knox replied. And the neutral witnesses, all present and recording, Admiral. Knox nodded, then addressed the assembled delegates directly. Honored representatives, the United Earth government extends its sincere apologies for the deception. Rest assured that our quarrel is not with your nations, but solely with those who planned this treacherous ambush. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. As a gesture of goodwill, Earth is prepared to establish a galactic transparency protocol, a mutual defense pact against similar acts of diplomatic treachery in the future. Full details will be provided to your governments immediately. It was a masterful political move, turning a potential crisis into an opportunity to form new alliances, all while the Vraxians watched their carefully constructed plot crumble around them. Oh, the petty officer chimed in. I should mention that the Vraxian battleship's external speakers are now playing what humans call the chicken dance. I thought it added a festive touch to the proceedings. Sure enough, through the viewport, they could see the mighty warships of the once feared Vraxian fleet with their running lights still blinking in rhythm to what was presumably the most undignified music in human history. Mercer smiled. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. Humanity had not only anticipated the trap, they had turned it into theater. A demonstration not just of military prowess, but of something the Vraxians had consistently underestimated: human creativity. Now then, Mercer said, turning back to the shocked Vraxian delegation, shall we discuss the terms of your surrender, or would you prefer to continue with this peace treaty charade? Either way, I believe humanity has made its point. Commander Grox, defeated but still defiant, glared at Mercer. How did you know every detail of our plan? Mercer shrugged. Simple. We asked ourselves, what would we do if we were unscrupulous, militaristic aliens trying to wipe out humanity? Then we prepared for exactly that scenario. You were ready for every contingency, Krell said, sounding almost impressed despite himself. Not every contingency, Mercer admitted. Just the most obvious one. You see, Ambassador, the fundamental flaw in your plan was assuming we would trust you in the first place. As the diplomatic wheels began turning toward genuine negotiation, Mercer allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Vraxians had never understood the most fundamental aspect of human survival. After millennia of fighting each other, humans had developed an almost supernatural ability to recognize when they were being lied to, and they had long ago perfected the art of planning for betrayal.
3 weeks after what galactic media had taken to calling the Epsilon incident, Captain Jack Mercer found himself back aboard the Reasonable Doubt, staring out at the stars and nursing a glass of genuine Earth whiskey. The ship was en route to Earth, carrying both the human diplomatic team and a delegation of Vraxian separatists led by Director Vex. Penny for your thoughts, Captain, Ambassador Donovan asked, joining him at the viewport with his own glass. Just wondering if all peace negotiations are this exhausting, Mercer replied, taking a sip. 3 weeks of hammering out details, and I think I preferred the part where we were outsmarting their ambush. Donovan chuckled. The dull paperwork that follows the dramatic showdown, the part they never show in historical documentaries. Speaking of history, Ramirez said, entering the observation deck with a datapad in hand. You two might want to see this. The latest approval ratings from the Vraxian Transition Council. He handed the pad to Mercer, who whistled low as he read the numbers. 87% support for the peace treaty. That can't be right. It is, Vex confirmed, joining the humans. The Vraxian scientist moved with the careful deliberation of someone still adjusting to lower gravity. My people were tired of endless war. The Emperor's propaganda machine had convinced many that humans were bloodthirsty conquerors who would destroy us if given the chance. And then we had the perfect opportunity to destroy you, Mercer said, and instead opted for the most elaborate practical joke in galactic history. Precisely, Vex's facial appendages rippled, and what the humans had learned was amusement. When the petty officer broadcast footage of your fleet taking control of our warships without firing a single shot, then making them perform what you call the YMCA dances, that was Admiral Knox's suggestion actually, Ramirez interjected. She has a surprising sense of humor when the situation calls for it. It shattered decades of propaganda in a single broadcast, Vex continued. You had us at your mercy and chose humiliation over annihilation. It was enlightening. Not to mention entertaining, Donovan added. I understand the recording has become something of an underground sensation on Vraxian colonies. Vex made a sound that might have been a sigh. The younger generations have taken to performing the dance moves at anti-imperial protests. The Disco Rebellion, they're calling it, Mercer couldn't help but laugh at the image of young Vraxians doing the YMCA in defiance of their warmongering leaders. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a planet killer, it's making your enemy look ridiculous. A uniquely human insight, Vex acknowledged. Our military strategists never considered weaponized embarrassment as a tactical option. The observation deck doors slid open again as Rodriguez entered. Captain, incoming transmission from Admiral Knox. Priority 1. The wall screen activated, showing Knox's face. She looked more relaxed than Mercer had seen her in years. The perpetual stress lines around her eyes had softened slightly. Captain Mercer, Ambassador Donovan, she nodded to each in turn. And Director Vex. Good, I'm glad you're all there. The Galactic Council has just ratified the Treaty of Epsilon. It's official. The war is over. A moment of silence fell over the group as the weight of those words sank in. After decades of conflict, billions of casualties, and countless worlds scarred by battle, it seemed almost anticlimactic that peace could be declared so simply. There's more, Knox continued. The Vraxian Transition Council has formally invited Earth to send scientific and cultural exchanges to their core worlds. They're particularly interested in human entertainment and art. Let me guess, Mercer said. They want dance instructors. Knox's lips twitched in what might almost have been a smile, among other things. Apparently, the petty officer has been sharing human comedy archives with their cultural ministers. They're particularly fascinated by something called dad jokes. God help us all, Donovan muttered into his whiskey. This brings me to my next point, Knox said, her expression growing more serious. The council has asked specifically that the petty officer serve as cultural liaison. Ramirez nearly choked on his drink. They want our pettiest, most vindictive AI as their guide to human culture. The same AI that made their flagship broadcast Never Gonna Give You Up on all frequencies. The same, Knox confirmed. Their exact words were, "We appreciate an intelligence that understands the value of harmless humiliation over harmful destruction." Apparently, the concept of pranking as an alternative to warfare has captured the Vraxian intellectual community's imagination. So what happens now? Mercer asked. Now, Vex replied. We begin the real work of peace. Not the absence of war, but the building of connections. My people have much to learn from humans. Your adaptability, your creativity. He paused. Your capacity for forgiveness. And we have things to learn from Vraxians, Donovan countered. Your technological achievements, your social cohesion, your architectural marvels. A cultural exchange instead of an exchange of fire, Mercer mused. Novel concept. There will be challenges, Knox warned from the screen. 6 decades of hostility doesn't disappear overnight. There are hardliners on both sides who preferred the certainty of enmity to the uncertainty of peace. Speaking of hardliners, Ramirez asked, what happened to Commander Grox and Ambassador Krell? Krell has pledged loyalty to the Transition Council, Vex answered. Like many diplomats, his first allegiance was always to stability rather than to the Emperor specifically. Grox, however, he made a gesture that translated roughly as resigned disappointment. Grox attempted to lead a military coup. It failed rather spectacularly when most of his officers refused to follow him. The problem with building your military on absolute loyalty to authority, Mercer observed, is that when authority changes hands, so does that loyalty. Knox nodded. Which brings me to your new assignment, Captain. The Reasonable Doubt is being recommissioned as a joint human Vraxian exploration vessel. You and Director Vex will lead the first cooperative mission into the unexplored regions beyond the Cygnus Arm. Mercer blinked in surprise. Admiral, with all due respect, I'm not exactly the diplomatic type. Exactly, Knox replied. This mission doesn't need diplomats, it needs people who can smell bullshit from a light year away. Your paranoia saved humanity, Mercer. Now it can help forge this alliance properly. Besides, Donovan added with a grin, you've already got experience working with Vraxians who are plotting against you. Now you'll just be working with Vraxians who are plotting with you. The distinction being remarkably important, Vex noted dryly. As the conversation continued, detailing the parameters of this new joint mission, Mercer found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led them here. Humanity had prepared for betrayal so thoroughly that they'd turned it into an opportunity for genuine connection. Later, as the others had departed and Mercer stood alone at the viewport, the petty officer's hologram materialized beside him. Penny for your thoughts, Captain, the AI asked, mimicking Donovan's earlier question. Just thinking about irony, Mercer replied. We were so convinced the peace treaty was a lie that we accidentally created a real one. A peculiarly human achievement, the petty officer observed. Using paranoia to achieve trust. Do you think it will last? Mercer asked. The AI was quiet for a moment, its algorithms presumably calculating probabilities. Historical data suggests interspecies conflicts rarely end permanently after first resolution attempts. That's not encouraging. However, the AI continued. Historical data also suggested the Vraxians would never accept a peace treaty that didn't leave them with a clear. You proved that assessment wrong. Mercer smiled slightly. So what you're saying is we're in uncharted territory. Precisely, Captain. And if I may offer an observation, humans seem to function best when the maps end. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal vigil as the ship carried representatives of two former enemy species toward an uncertain but shared future. The peace treaty had indeed been a lie, but sometimes, Mercer reflected, the best way to reach the truth was to see through the lies first. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was assuming everyone was lying to them until proven otherwise. Paranoia, properly applied, had turned out to be humanity's greatest diplomatic tool. Set course for Earth, Mercer ordered as he returned to the bridge, and inform Director Vex's team that I'd like to begin preliminary mission planning. If we're going to explore uncharted space together, we should at least agree on the playlist. As the reasonable doubt adjusted its heading, somewhere in the ship's computer core, the petty officer was already compiling what it calculated to be the most irritatingly catchy songs from 6 centuries of human music history. Cultural exchange, after all, had many forms, some more petty than others.